So welcome to this webinar organised as part of the Just Growth programme. My name's Dave Boyle. I work for the Community Shares Company, and we've been involved in over 20 share issues, helping groups raise around 2.5 million is the running total at present. And we've done that in a variety of capacities, from advisors to writers of offer documents. We also work with Crowdfunder. We're the official provider of community shares support work to Crowdfunder, which is the UK's leading community project platform. In this session, I'm not going to talk about what's great about community shares or what they are or the technicalities. I'm assuming that that information is the kind of stuff which many of the people listening to this will be aware of already, or will be able to find from the community shares units web pages, which are incredibly helpful in this respect. I'm going to talk about the sort of more practical nitty-gritty side of things, where we somebody is not on mute. I'm just going to take them off. If you could check that you're on mute, by the way, that would be really helpful. Thank you. So I'm going to be talking more about the nitty-gritty elements of the how to run a successful share offer. These are essentially the kind of tips from the coalface, which are not on the community shares units. Incredibly helpful guidance. What's the point of this session came about from chatting with Claire about what help could be provided, and the sort of key lesson which comes out of all the share issues I've worked on which have been successful is that you can't start early enough with respect to the share issues engagement and planning. And if you're feeling in the middle of a share issue or towards the end of it that you think you need a boost, the chances are it might be too late at that stage, because there's relatively little which can be done at that late stage. So it's about getting some information to you before you start share issues. We'll also talk more about crowdfunding as well, because at some fundamental level, a community share issue is a big form of a crowdfunding campaign. And so I'll touch on the specifics of smaller scale crowdfunding campaigns, which is using information provided by colleagues at Crowdfunder. So straight in. The first thing to do is, I suggest, is you think like Evel Knievel, which isn't to say that you acquire a devil-may-care attitude to life and limb, or an addiction to jumping over spaces, but think about the mechanics of a share issue, its components. So let's just have a quick look at this. Indio, 1967 season panels, here he goes, and he will go. He's down and he is hurt. Oh my God. That was Evel Knievel's jump in 1976 at Wembley Stadium for the aficionados. The reason why I use that is because it encapsulates the three elements which are necessary for your successful campaign. So the metaphor here, or the extended metaphor, is the number of buses is the target you're seeking to raise, the amount of money you need to raise in order to be successful. That's kind of fixed. There might be some elements of you can accept a minimum or a maximum, but there is a target in mind which you really need to hit. And that's why you're doing the share issue, and that tends to be something which is governed by external factors more than anything else. There is a project, there is a sum of money you need, and the thanks to Claire for pointing out that you can't see the slides. Never work with children, technology and animals, as they say. Let's put the main screen on. Sorry about this. Let's just take 2 seconds to figure this out. Is that better, Claire? You just confirm that. Great. Sorry about that. Unfortunately, GoToMeeting hides the mouse when you start recording it, which is about as helpful as a chocolate teapot for this kind of thing. So you probably heard Evel Knievel jumping over some buses at Wembley Stadium. The reason I showed that was that the dynamics of a share issue are. Sorry about this. It's just, as soon as I move into the presentation, it cuts off from the GoToMeeting control panel, which is really quite infuriating. So the three elements I've got here is the target is the number of buses. What gets you over that leap is essentially the speed at takeoff and the angle of the ramp. The ramp is your campaign. The angle of attack is critical. If you are too steep, you will not get over the leap you need, and if you're too shallow, you'll go flying into the first bus. So that's really quite an important factor. But the really big thing which determines whether Evel Knievel gets over the buses and whether your share issue will be successful is all about the speed, which in this case, the analogy extended is your engagement with your community. You can't stress this enough. It's far too late in the middle of a share issue to be thinking about who might be the potential investors and introducing yourselves to them. So the critical factor is your engagement. There is also another factor which is equally important, though it's less you can do about it, is the project itself, which in this case is the bike. The salience of your project is absolutely critical. So you can't make people interested in things they're not interested in, and your ability to engage a community is somewhat bounded by the size of the community you can engage. So to some extent, it's about how salient your project can be. Obviously, most community-minded projects have an element of benefit which can extend beyond its core work, but to some extent there is a fixed limit to who might be potentially interested in what you're doing, who shares the values which animate your campaign, your project, your group, your sphere of activity. Within that wider group of potential investors, it's all about how we can engage them and how we can warm them up before the share offer actually launches. That's the key thing, really, with a successful share issue, which we'll now talk a little bit about. What are the things you can do to engage that crowd? So let's get the next slide. First thing to stress is you are the center of this. You are the yellow dot the black dot at the heart of the yellow. Lots of groups are full of passionate people. They are giving an enormous amount of time to make their projects work. They're giving an enormous amount of time and passion. That tends to isolate them from the people who are going to be the likely investors. They are generally doing an awful lot of work to prepare a share issue. It might be doing the financials and the business plan. It might be something related to land acquisitions or other property related things. There tends to be an element where everybody retreats into a smaller group and spends their entire time in the evenings, because everybody's usually a volunteer, working on the technicalities and the minutiae. As a result, they forget to talk to normal people. And I use normal people not to say that you are all weird, but let's be honest, people do not tend to volunteer for groups and spend an enormous amount of time planning a share issue. That's not a normal activity. If that was their norm, there would be more people involved in your steering groups, your boards of directors, or your committees, however you choose to describe it. There are groups of people who might be in the next yellow circle who generally are just like you. They just don't have enough time to devote to the project as you are, but they share your values, your aspirations, and belief in how brilliant this project is. Then we move into the red, the blue, the black, and the white, which are people who don't quite think the same way as you. They think maybe very similar things, but their take on what you're doing is fundamentally different, because if it was exactly the same, they would be joining your group, they would be known to you, and they would be volunteering, and they would be active in a way that you are. And it's slightly reminiscent of party political campaigning in some respects. What happens at an election is that people are sent to talk to undecided voters, and the people who are sent to talk to them are people who've known how they were going to vote in this election since they were about 7 years old, i.e. the politically committed are going to talk to the politically uncommitted. And to some extent, these are two different types of human being who think about politics in fundamentally different ways, and their ability to converse and think in the way that the uncommitted think is fundamentally challenged, because they just can't get their head around it at a fundamental level. So you see a similar thing sometimes with groups, either through just over focus on the technicalities and the nitty gritty, in some cases because there is a fundamental difference in worldview, which makes it very difficult to understand why somebody doesn't think that what you're engaged in is the most amazing project and the best way to operationalize a set of values or ethics. When you're talking to said people who don't quite think the same way as you, I think the other problem you sometimes get, and this is often because you spend a lot of time doing business plans and being very rational, is to forget to be emotional. You might have a different view. I'm a big subscriber to the sort of work of Daniel Kahneman and the behavioral economics sort of approach, which is that Kahneman's sort of catchphrase is you think much less than you think when you think you're thinking. You can unpack that one at a later stage. It basically means we make our minds up in ways which we can't really understand why we've decided to do what we're doing, and afterwards we might be able to provide a rational justification for it, but this is post facto. At the time we were actually making a decision, it wasn't rational. There's all sorts of biological stuff you can overlay at that we've spent gazillions of years not being linguistic and rational, and relatively late in our evolutionary history have we developed the capacity for rational thought. But just because it thinks it's the boss doesn't mean it's actually the driver of our motivations and behaviors. So you need to think about this in terms of your offer to people, and make it something which does emotionally connect with them. There was some interesting research by a research agency called Brain Juicer, who did some work with Greenpeace, and they put 3 Facebook pages, all of which had the same call to action, which was to sign a petition calling upon governments to protect the Arctic environment. One of them was a very rational, scientific-led case. One of them was shall we say, a protectionist case, save the Arctic. And the final one was a prospective call to action, which was let's help create the best environment for the flourishing of the ecosystem in the Arctic. And by a country mile, the positive emotional way of writing the appeal was much more successful, followed by the more negative saving the Arctic, and the final appeal, which was rational and not emotional, was a complete dud. And many share offer campaigns I've seen, I think, unfortunately fall into the trap of assuming that everybody's rational like they are, everybody's understood that there is a clear business case here, and that's important to stress to people, but it's equally important to connect with their hearts as well as their heads. And starting from that position, you might run your campaign differently if you can connect at that emotional level. So some of the things which might assist there is think about your brand. A lot of people think branding is some kind of dirty word, or it might not apply to them because, hey, they've not really got a logo. By brand, I mean people emotionally connect with your project and you, even if you don't realize you're doing something which projects your brand. So that might relate to the type of material you send out to people in advance, where you you might have a decision about what kind of quality of material to post through people's door in your community. Try and choose glossy, try and choose colour, because to some extent you're giving a sense of how professional you will be at running your project. People won't realise it, but at a certain point when they're asked to invest, they're asked to back you, your project, and you as a team and your competence, and they'll think, will these group of people create the kind of project which will be successful, sustainable, and accord with my values and my ethics? Are they my kind of people, and is it my kind of project? And it's at this point things like, really obvious spelling mistakes in publicity material makes a difference. Organising a meeting, if it's chaotically organised, if some mistakes over that kind of thing, it just gives people a lingering impression that this is somehow an amateur thing. So think about putting your best foot forward from the moment you start engaging with your community, not just at the point of launching the share issue and producing documentation and so on and so forth. People will be making their minds up about you well in advance of the time you ask them to actually make a decision about whether they will invest in what you're doing. You can't fatten a pig on market day is my favourite political quote. It's from Australian politics, which is very rumbustious. It basically means it's too late on election day to convince the voters one way or the other. The decision has been made already. They know how they're going to vote. The same is true with a share offer. At the point at which the share offer takes flight, you already have got a lot of people deciding already whether they are likely to invest or not. It's just too late in the middle of the campaign to think about engaging a completely new audience or persuading people that they're wrong if they think that this isn't a project they should get behind. All you can do in the campaign really is organise. You can't mobilise. In that sense. Sorry, the other way around. You can't organise. All you can do is mobilise the troops who've been placed into position by your engagement work in the weeks and months leading up to it. You're just converting them from being people who are supportive into people who demonstrate their support through giving you, significant sums of money. It's not the time to be having the discussion with people because to some extent you've not got the time to do that. You need to be pushing people over the line rather than dragging them over the line, as it were. When you get to your campaign, you need to plan every single day of it, which comes on to the next slide, which is about the issue of how long one should campaign for. But when it comes to the campaign itself, you need to be thinking about who are the target audiences we've engaged with and how are we going to engage with them in each day. The idea that you have a launch event and then it's just out there with maybe a Facebook post here and a couple of tweets there just isn't enough. There needs to be a degree of organisation. That's not just because it takes a significant amount of work to raise money from the public. Crowdfunding has a reputation as being some kind of magic wand which is waved and thusly projects get a load of money. It's not true. The successful projects do a lot of work. There's no way around that fundamental. But the more you campaign, the more you're demonstrating this matters, the more you're demonstrating that you care, you're passionate about it, and you really desperately want this project to succeed, which in itself is part of branding your project as an important thing which needs to happen. If it looks like you're a little bit tired, if it looks like you're not that concerned whether or not this campaign will be successful, people will pick up on that and they will use that to count themselves out. I should say that the backdrop of this is we're trying to reduce reasons why people can opt out of backing your project when we know they should. They're the kind of people who want to live in a world where your projects are successful and they share your values, but maybe some of them are, the easy people to get, the low-hanging fruit, the people in those circles closer to you in the target. They're the easy ones to convert. It's the next level which gets harder and harder. And a lot of those people might be very easy to persuade, but they're a little bit less convinced, and they can find reasons to dupe themselves. They can they can opt out, and essentially they're just being slightly tight. They really should get behind your project. They really should be supporting your project financially, but they're finding excuses to not do so. So one of your tasks is to not give them those easy excuses. So they're forced in the long, dark night of the soul to decide, am I someone who's actually going to get behind what I believe in, or am I going to find a way to weasel out of it? And if they're ultimately not going to get behind you, then there's very little you can do about that, but you can force them to apprehend themselves in that kind of almost existential way, rather than make it easy for them to opt out. This slide won't work because unfortunately it's not playing because of GoToMeeting not being very good. Anyway, one of the issues about any campaign is the length of time it takes to run it. You will always get this U shape, which I call the trough of despondence, which is on the y-axis is the number of people pledging to support you, and on the x-axis is the time of the offers campaign. And essentially, the first few days you will get quite a lot of activity. You will tend to raise between 10 and 20% of what you need on those days, which is to say, if you need 20,000 and you only raise 2,000, then probably it's not going to work, because if you need to raise 20,000, then you need at least 2,000, maybe more like 4,000 on that first day. Over time, energy levels dissipate and people move on to other things, and the number of pledges per day starts to tail off before we move towards the end of the campaign. And then suddenly people realise they've got to do what they promised themselves to do a few weeks earlier, and the numbers pick up again, and the momentum is generated by the impending closure of this campaign. It's historically within community share offers, I think there's been far too long between the opening and closing. People think that if you're trying to raise, let's say, £100,000 from around about 1,000 people, you should give yourself a fair bit of time to warm them up. That may be so, but since you will always have a trough in the middle, and to be perfectly honest, that will be a depressing trough for you, because you will suddenly be pressing refresh, or you will be checking the mail every morning to see who's invested, and what you will find is that there's not as many as you'd hoped or liked, and that will make you sad. And there's very little you can do about that sadness. So why make it something which lasts 2 months, will be my argument, when it should last 2 weeks. So I think there's a lot to be said for generating momentum by constraining the time period in which your offer takes place. So at the start of your offer, your publicity blitz will get you quite a lot of pledges, and then it tails off for a bit, but that very quickly moves into the final stage where you're reminding people that the offer closes and they need to pull their finger out pretty damn quickly. There was going to be another slide which we can't play, which is if you Google Derek Sivers how to create a movement, you will find it on YouTube. I'll put a link in the chat later. It's a lovely video of a festival in the USA where a kid starts dancing on a hillside to some music, and everybody's looking at him thinking he's quite weird. And then one other person joins him, and another person joins him, and over time, more and more people join him, and eventually the whole hillside is absolutely jumping up and down following his lead. Sivers uses it to explain how it's not a leader who is important, it's the first follower and the second follower who makes a movement. The other point you can make of it is it demonstrates thresholds for participation. The first person who gets up and dances does so because they just feel the music. The 27th person who joins does so because they don't want to feel left out. Fundamentally different motivations for doing the same thing, and the same thing should be in the back of your mind as you think about your campaign, that whilst everybody will be being asked to do the same act, which is to say give you some money to make some change in the world happen, the reasons why they may do so will be fundamentally different, and some people need to see a crowd starting to gather before they will get involved. So one of the things you should look to do, remember the lesson of Blue Peter appeals. Blue Peter always started on around 25% of what they were looking to raise from their overall target. So it looked like there was momentum already. This very big stone was being rolled up the hill, but it already was moving and rolling quite well. So when people come to your if you're using a crowdfunding platform, when they come to your page, or if they go to your website, they see a running total. You need to give them hope, and you need to give them a sense that this is happening, and they need to get on board because this is real. So have your own friends and family who you know are going to invest already having invested. So when people arrive and see how you're doing, they're thinking, yeah, this project's got some legs. Don't put them all in though, because you need to keep some back to keep that sense of momentum going. There is a degree of manipulation of people's expectations. I come back to the point I made about friction. They're looking to excuse themselves from supporting it. And if one of the things they think is this campaign has topped out, it's not going to do any better than this, that's why I'm not going to back it myself, even though I should. I'm not backing it because not enough other people have backed it. We're trying to close off people's reasons to weasel out of doing what we think and know they should, and what they themselves may have told us they are going to do. When you're doing your campaign, remember that it's not just about your networks, but the networks of your networks. It's the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon style approach to campaigning, really, that you can use people and different sort of different audiences, different niches who might be motivated in subtly different ways from the core offer. You can use those people who are part of your campaign, who've supported you, to communicate with the other people who are in their sort of sub-tribe, because not everybody will be thinking the same way. You need to find ways and people who can convey your message into the subgroups who might need a subtly different spin on things. But when you're thinking about investing, one of the things you will, or running your campaign, I should say, is that there's only so many hours in the day, and you need help from real people. We know from advertising over 100 years that word of mouth, it remains the most powerful way to sell things to people, and the best people who can convey a message that your share offer is a good one and worth investing in and worth believing in and hoping in are other people who've made that choice themselves. To some extent, you're not credible witnesses because you believe too much. You're not ordinary like they are. You need other investors who are in the community to be your sort of witnesses as to the rightness of your cause and the legitimacy of what you're asking people to do. And they themselves, once they've got their friends to invest, those friends can carry that message forward as well. So finding ways to not just campaign to people, but make those people your campaigners after they've signed up is a really critical point. It not only lightens your load and broadens your reach, it also enables them to be the filter who subtly transform your message for the communities they are looking to project that message into, which saves you the hassle of trying to work out how to think differently to sort of translate your message for those people. The other thing to say here is a lot of people spend quite a lot of time looking for grants to fund the first stage of development of their projects. And that's great. If you're good at grant applications, you've got a funder who's really supportive of what you're doing, that can be fantastic. But there might be a better way, because even if you do get a grant, and you might not, and it's quite soul destroying to fill out grant applications anyway, and if they're not successful, it's doubly so. But all it proves is that you've written a good grant application, whereas what you're really trying to find out is our project viable? Are there enough people who think like us, or are we the sort of almost sum total of people who care about this? That's not just necessary for the project to get the funding in the first instance, but usually to make it sustainable in the medium and longer term, it needs that group of people who believe in it, who are bigger than the steering group. How do you prove if those people exist? How do you validate your project? Well, you can crowdfund it, because that's not the clicktivism of just clicking like, saying, yeah, this is great, you knock yourself out and don't ask me to do anything. This is about getting people to actually say, I want to live in this world where you're successful, and I'm prepared to show you in advance that I support it. a small bit of crowdfunding to cover those costs can be really, really useful, because it validates your message. It creates advocates for what you're trying to achieve. It's excellent proof of concept to others, funders, or others who are necessary to get behind your project, who might be thinking, well, it's a lovely idea, but it'll never happen, or it's a lovely idea, but terribly niche. And how do you demonstrate that there is a passionate community out there? Well, get some money from them, because in our society that is a proxy for concern. It's a proxy for engagement, and it's also what you need to pay the bills you've run up in getting your share offer to the launch pad. When it comes to doing some crowdfunding, there are some tips here from crowdfunder themselves. The first thing you need for any crowdfunding campaign really is to have a team, and one of the things you need there is someone to make a video. You can usually find someone to make a video. You don't need to have great kit. A modern smartphone has a camera which is usually good enough, and also the kind of video you're looking to make works best with a degree of authenticity, which comes from it using everyday technology as opposed to super duper high production values. You obviously need leadership, drive and vision, and understand your market. You need somebody who's involved, who's digitally savvy, who knows how social media works, who knows how to connect the campaign to a variety of platforms where people might be able to engage with it. And it needs some passion. It needs people who are going to just get out there and have conversations with people, the kind of people who are not afraid to pick up the phone and do cold calling. That's not everybody. Speaking personally, the idea of going up to people in the street randomly and asking them would they like to invest in X, Y, or Z project fills me with stone cold terror. Others think it's brilliant. They just love having those conversations, and your team needs some of those latter. You often find you've got enough of the former in spades, but it's the latter who really are the critical ones for a crowdfunding campaign. Your story, again, needs to really focus on what you're trying to achieve. Again, it's that emotional connection. Lots of people start with who they are. Nobody cares who you are. It's what are you going to do with the cash? What do you want? What's the change you want to make in the world? Connect on the level of values as much as the rationality and the sort of technical correctness or potential sustainability of the project as a whole. That can come as well, but tell people why this matters and what's the change you're going to make in the world. The video should be viral in 2 minutes. By viral, I mean it's short and able to be shared. People don't share things they get bored with because they don't want to send them to their friends who will then think them boring. So keep it nice and short, 90 seconds, 2 minutes. Use faces because this is about people. You are trying to connect with humans, and having a video with a voiceover and text is not as good as having somebody speaking those words, because that proves that real people, real humans are behind this project. Real humans like you, the potential backer of this project, the potential investor, the potential crowdfunder, but have a script as well, so you know what you're doing, and because you'll end up waffling or you'll end up overrunning your cues. And try and get other people outside the group to be part of that video. So, you're demonstrating that there are already people in this crowd, they exist, and people like you are already thinking this is great. And show the impact as well, what you hope to achieve. If there are beneficiaries who are going to be the people whose lives get changed much more fundamentally, then show them, get them to tell their story, rather than coming up with stats about the impact you've made. Again, think about emotional connection with the viewer. And when you're actually comes to running your campaigns, there are, in the warm-up side on the left of that slide, meet with people, email them, get people, as I say, to pledge in advance. So you look like you've got momentum already. Pick up the phone. There is I think a danger you sometimes get with crowdfunding on crowdfunding platforms, where people think they've put the page on the platform and that's kind of it. That's just the start of it. But before the start of it, you need to have actually warmed people up so that they know what's coming down the track and what to be ready for and what your call to action to those people will be. That gives them the time to think through the implications of that, to become in their own minds people who are about to back your project, rather than people who are still thinking about whether or not to back your project. You need as many of the former of that and as little of the latter, because when the campaign hots up, you don't have the time to talk to everybody individually and have that conversation with them. Don't forget the local press, local TV, local radio, incredibly important, as well as the social media and as well as the emails and the platforms themselves. Old media still has a very big role to play. If you can write a decent press release, you will find that threatened budgets at local newspapers mean they're likely to print it as you send it to them. So spend a bit of time making it look good, and you'll more likely get the coverage you're after. You're just being busy in the campaign. You're reminding people. You might be very boring because all roads lead to you saying, have you visited our site or the crowdfunding site, and have you pledged? And after a time, people will tune out of that message because they've heard it before. So find ways to say the same thing in new ways. And maybe that involves new people speaking who've not been heard before. Maybe it involves a different audience. It can sometimes just involve wearing silly costumes because you're looking for a photo opportunity which shows you in a different light. But you're essentially trying to put a novel spin on a same hoary old story, which is, please come to our site and give us some cash, and then we can help change the world.